The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
While people trickle in, this slide is my attempt to summarize what we said last time, or you said last time mostly. So it's basically the movie is making a case for microfinance, and the case is all these different points, or they're building a case for a particular version of microfinance, and they're making this set of points. They start with the point that poor have poor access to credit, that they are reliable borrowers, that maybe group lending has something to do with the reliability, that microfinance can lift people out of poverty. The way it does it is through new businesses, and that and the fact that these new businesses generate increased earnings of women has the implication that there is then greater investment in human capital. So, and finally, there is an implied but also I think important claim that there's no conflict between sort of the commercialization of microcredit and an emphasis on its social role. So those are the claims being made. So what I want to do today is mostly kind of go through the thinking behind what's the argument behind each of these, and then try to look at the data a bit. So this is I'm going to now tell you a little bit about an evaluation we did of a program of an organization called Spandana. It's a very traditional program. They have group liability, mostly weekly payment. Starting loan is about 10,000 rupees. Interest rate was about 12%, 24% per year really. The way they calculate is funny, so it's 24% per year. It was a very large MFI already, but it had not entered this city called Hyderabad. It was so the deal we had with them was they were going to enter the city of Hyderabad, but not everywhere. They're going to enter out of 104 neighborhoods we selected, poor neighborhoods we selected, they're going to enter 52, and they'll keep the other 52 for 18 months untouched. That was the deal. So that's the Spandana group. We surveyed, this data is from 7,200 people who we surveyed, 72 for households. These households were selected based on the fact that they will be eligible for a loan. It's not interesting to compare people. I mean, we could have also done something else, but it makes sense to select people. Now, we didn't select them just in the places where it's got microcredit, because we wanted to compare the places which got microcredit and which didn't. So we had equal numbers of people, where 3,600 people with these characteristics in where they got the loan, and 3,600 people with these characteristics who didn't get the loan. Basic idea is to compare people who could have got a loan if they had been in a microfinance organization in their neighborhood with people who did get a loan. These people are relatively poor. They have about a monthly expenditure, family of 5, monthly expenditure of over $125. Most of their children are going to school though. They do borrow. When they borrow, many of them have loans. When they borrow, 69% of the households have loans, but a lot of the households that have loans from money lenders pay about 4% per month. So Spandana charges 24% per year, which is less than 2% a month, because that's simple interest, 2% a month simple interest, which is less than, substantially less than half of that. There was no MFI borrowing at the beginning. Lots of them run businesses, 31%. That's a number to note, because you take the rich country average, the rich country average is something like 12%. 9% run more than one business. But these businesses are extremely basic. Like, I have a shop, I have in the shop I have bottles, in the big bottles with cookies, matchboxes, cigarettes, and candy in them. That's my shop. I sell that. Or I have a little push cart and I sell vegetables on it. So these businesses are not high skill, they have very little capital, and they have no employees. Their profits are about $75 a month. So very small businesses like those. When we asked them at the beginning, why do you want to get a loan? A lot of them said what you had already anticipated. You might want to get a loan not just to start a business, but also to repay a loan, to do something for your household, to buy a fridge or a TV. So they were quite candid about the fact that they didn't necessarily want to start a business. So you should skip that. So before we get into the results, it's worth thinking a little bit about what we should expect to see. And in particular, should we expect people on average to be consuming more when they get a loan? Yes, no? Answers there. Yeah, go ahead, explain.
If they intend to start a business with a loan, then you might expect that they would tighten their funds on consumption in the first few weeks of the month.
Yeah.
Therefore, the consumption will go down.
You might think the consumption might go down as a result of starting a business, because right now I'm starting a business, I don't want to start it at the smallest possible scale. I might want to buy some inputs for my business, expand it. So I might, when I start a business, I might actually want to cut back on consumption for a while before I go back to, over time it should go back up, but at the beginning I might very well see a fall in consumption. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, that if people are starting businesses, then they may not actually, they may actually cut back. So you may not see a big net increase. You will see an increase. If they start the business and business is successful, then 2 years later you'll see an increase, but not right away. So here's the first problem we had in this evaluation, which is that despite the fact that Spandana said they would not enter these neighborhoods that were put into control, the loan officers did. Why? Because they thought, well, that looks like a nice neighborhood, we could lend more to people and make more money. So they went in, and we had to kind of fight a lot to stop them. And so in the end, the difference in Spandana loans was only 13%. Should have been bigger. Now, because that happened, so some of the control neighborhoods got the loans. We are not going to be using the actual fact of who got a loan and who didn't get a loan. We're going to use the intention to treat. We'll compare places that we thought should not have a loan with places which we thought should have a loan. That's something that was determined by randomizing, whereas who actually got a loan was not random. I would go into the most, when the people went into control neighborhoods, they went into the best, the most attractive ones. So we can't do that. We need to compare ones which actually got the loan. And even worse than that, where Spandana didn't go, other MFIs went, because they wanted to fill up the market. So this difference is small. So when you see that, why is that relevant? Well, when you see the difference, I'm going to show you the average difference between places that were intended to get microfinance with places that were not intended to get microfinance. Notice that that difference is only 8%. The places that were intended to get microfinance are only 8%. People there are only 8% more likely to have a loan than places that were intended not to get microfinance. So when I look at the average of those places, what should I do to get, what will happen to the magnitude of the effect? It will be very small, because only 8% difference, in both places, a lot of people got loans. So the difference is going to be small. So to get the real sense of the magnitude of the effect, I need to multiply by, since it's 8% of the people generated this difference, to get the full effect of this, what should I do? To get a sense of the magnitude, what would I need to do? If 8% generated an effect of 5, what would the effect have been if 100% had, if the difference was 100%? You'll multiply by 100 divided by 8, so 12. You will multiply by 12.
Isn't it the case that you can look up what is the average? If there is no microfinance, then it's 100% of the people that don't have access to it.
Yeah.
I guess it's 100%.
So you'll do something like that. So when you look at the numbers, they will look small, but you really have to realize that that's a difference generated by, the difference is generated by a very small difference in take-up. So these results look much smaller than they really are. So here's what happened in the business space. There was some increase in new businesses, which was significant, some increase in profits, which was not significant, some increase in revenues, which was not significant. But the new business was significant. You get about, so think of it this way, this is the number of businesses set up in 1.5 years. So basically 31% already had a business, another 7% set up businesses in the treatment, and 5.3% set up business in the control. So that's like a 30% increase in the number of new businesses. So that's not small. It looks small numbers, but in fact it's a significant increase. You went this, in any case, people don't start that many new businesses. So this is not there was some effect. Consumption, blue is always controlled, yellow is treatment. So consumption didn't really go up significantly, but we kind of discussed why that might happen. You do see more durable purchases, more business durable purchases, and I won't say what temptation goods are right now. Okay, so less temptation goods, but you do see more business. Here's what didn't happen. Despite the gendered nature of spending, apparently nothing changed. So schooling is hard to change because everybody goes to school. So let's say that's difficult to change. But nothing else changed either. Children were just as unhealthy. Women were no more likely to have decision power on spending in the household, and health expenditures didn't go up. So if you think that women spend differently, we didn't find any evidence of it. So there was the gender effect that we had sort of discussed doesn't seem to be in this data. The next thing we did is go back to that story we were telling. We were telling a story where some people would invest, start a new business, and they will cut their consumption. Others will others will not start their business, and now they have no reason to cut their consumption. So imagine that there are two kinds of people. One kind of people are going to start a new business, and the other kind won't. So what we want to do is we want to predict who those people are. We don't want to, so if we went to the treatment areas and we looked at who started a new business, and we went to the control areas and we looked at who started a new business and we compared them, Would that be a valid comparison? Let me repeat the question. Suppose I went to the treatment areas, and the treatment areas and the control area were randomly chosen. I went to the treatment areas, I found people there who had started a business. I went to the control areas and I found people who had already started a business, newly started a business, and I compared them. Would that be a valid comparison?
In the first example, when you went to the treat areas, did you look at people that just newly started a business or people that had a business?
So when I say newly started a business, these are people who started a business in the 18 months when we were observing these areas.
No, it wouldn't be valid in my opinion.
Why?
And the reason why is because while you are comparing new businesses started, there's just in the treatment area, it's hard to, without more precise information, it's hard to understand who started that business due to the fact that they got the loan versus just due to the fact that they're planning to start anyways. And I mean, yeah, you could compare it to control area, but even your control versus your treatment area, it's not necessarily indicative that they have the same sort of basis. It'd be better to look at differences of like the treatment area before and after they got the loans.
You were nodding your head. You want to do it? Do you have a different answer to that? So basically, I think that's not quite right. I think you don't never want to do it. The reason you never want to do it is because you don't actually think of people who start a business when I come and offer them a loan, versus people who start a business when no loans were available or less loans were available. Well, they're different kinds of people. When loan is easy to get, I might start a business, because the loans are difficult to get. I'm lazy, I won't start a business. Whereas somebody who starts a loan when loans are not easily available is probably much more committed to starting a business, is much more incentivized. So you don't want to compare them. So what we had to do, we had to think of what could predict who would start a business. Then what we could do is we could look for the kind of people who would start a business in treatment and look for the same kind of people in control. So we could have a predicted model of who would start a business. We could compare the things that predict whether you start a business or not. Okay, so we want to divide the population based on fixed characteristics. And the fixed characteristic that work very well is if you own land, and if you have typically a woman in the household who's literate and doesn't work. So if you have some assets, you have there's a woman in the household who is currently not working, but she has skills, she's literate, she's actually a prime candidate for starting a business. So it turns out that if you look for families with these characteristics in treatment and control, there are about equal numbers of families in treatment and control, not accidentally. I mean, that's how you'd expect randomly chosen. So they are about the same. So you take those two kinds of families, these kinds of families which are available in treatment and control, they're identical. Yeah.
So you use like instrumental variables, or is that not really?
This is not an instrumental variable. This is just predicting who are going to start a business. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this is like baseline characteristics. They're just different people. I can estimate the treatment effect for any subset of people. Like I could say, what's the effect on tall people? Right? This is just take a subset of the population who are with these characteristics that predict a business. Those people, those people's consumption, does it behave differently from the consumption of everyone else? That's the question I'm asking. If these are people whose characteristics predict that they would start a business, do they behave differently from everybody else whose characteristics predict that they won't start a business? So there are three groups I'm going to look at. People who are going to start, whose characteristics predict they will start a business, people who already have a business, and people who neither have a business nor will start a business. So that's what I'm trying to. And if you do it, you do see the difference. In the treatment, the people who we predict should start a business are much more likely to start a business. The people who we predict shouldn't start a business actually slightly less likely to start a business. So that's sort of what you'd expect. And now you start to see much bigger differences. So the people who start a business and people who already had a business expand their businesses, or they buy durables. The people who didn't have a business and are not planning a business, so durables can include, for example, business assets. They can repair their house where they're going to have a shop. So all those things are durables. So they seem to do stuff that could be related to the business. The people who we predict should not start a business, don't start a business, and they don't make any durable expenditures. They increase non-durable expenditures a lot. So the bottom group increases non-durable expenditures. That's like spending on food and things like that. The top groups, the middle group, basically nothing changes, and the top group cuts non-durable. They're eating less. These people are spending less on food, they're buying more durables. The durables are what they want for the future. So they seem to be behaving in very different ways. So finally, this thing of temptation goods. What are temptation goods? Well, we ask people, this is a betel nut seller. Betel leaf seller. So people in South Asia and Southeast Asia chew these leaves and these nuts, which are called betel nuts and betel leaves. They have slightly narcotic effects, mild narcotic effects. A lot of people chew them. And this guy is a vendor. He's a small business owner. So we ask people in the baseline to tell us what are things you want to give up on spending. So we asked them to give us a list of things they said they'll give up on they want to give up. And that was basically very simple. They wanted to give up on tea, coffee, snacks, betel nuts, cigarettes, and alcohol. That's all they wanted to. These were the things they wanted to give up. Now we go back 2 years later, look at the data, and we classify spending on these things versus everything else. These things we call temptation, because there's things that they say they don't want to do, but they end up spending on. And what you see quite dramatically is that that's where you see a big difference. The people who are starting a business cut back massively in their spending on temptation goods. The people who will never start a business seem to be having a party. They go out and they start spending more on those things. So basically what's going on for many of these people is they're turning their temptation expenditures, they're using that money to pay the loan, the loan payment, and then with the money they're buying something else. So when they get the money, they either buy a business durable or a business durable. They expand their consumption, their durable ownership, and then they pay it down by cutting back on their temptation goods. So they're drinking less tea and they're owning more TVs, if you like. Yeah.
Why do you think in the top section, people in the control group should cut less on temptation group than those who are taking loans?
Because these people are starting a business, they need the money.
No, but here in the control group also they are starting new businesses.
No, they're much less likely. Remember, these people have high propensity to start a business. Nevertheless, in control, they're much less likely to, they're about only half as likely to start a business in control as in treatment. So these people are much more likely to be people who have started businesses in treatment. Okay, so that's sort of now this is a story which is kind of, it depends on so when we publish these results, the reaction from the microfinance industry was very negative largely. They thought these results were showing that they had failed, and they really went ballistic. I mean, there was lots and lots of blogs which explained how we don't understand how to analyze microcredit, and people made, there were like many on the World Bank's website, there were like dismissive statements and all that. So there are lots of these things, basically claiming that microcredit is too subtle to be analyzed by us. So why was the reaction? We actually didn't think that this was so negative. In fact, we thought this was fine. The new businesses went up. The people we thought would do better were doing better. Some people were doing worse. That's normal. Like so you give people a loan, not everybody is going to use it well. Some people are going to use it in ways that will get them into trouble. Others are going to have use it very well and do well out of it. And you're always creating some risk when you create financial products. But people really hated these results, and so we got some pushback. That went away for the kind of a sad way. What happened next was that, so this was going on through 2009. When our results came out, there was lots of kind of pushback, and then side by side with that, something else started happening, and that's sort of unfortunate. So so the next thing that happened was that in 2009, and I guess in 2009 or once, an organization called Compartamos in Mexico had an IPO. You know what an IPO is? An initial public offering. They sold their stock, and they made a ton of money. An organization called SKS in India, which we actually worked with on something else, not microcredit, then went ahead and they had another IPO. These IPOs raised a lot of money, like hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reaction to that was, correctly, this means these organizations are very profitable. Suddenly, everybody got upset with them, because they realized that if these companies can be sold for $300 million, then they must be making a lot of money. Now, that's a bit unfair, because they were making a lot of money, but they also had lots of clients. If you have 3 million clients, then making $300 million over the next 20 years or something is not so much after all. I mean, it's not that much money. If you think of it, I have 3 million clients, I'm making $300 million, that's $100 million, $100 per client over the next, let's say, 10 years. So that's $10 per year per client, which is not nearly as profitable as it sounds when you say it's $300 billion. Because these are big organizations, and many of them are. So in any case, that got them into lots of trouble. So first thing that happened was that a lot of microfinance people started getting very upset. Muhammad Yunus, who started Grameen Bank, was really vehement. He called them the new usurers, and basically said that this commercial, this kind of commercialization of microfinance goes against the spirit of microfinance. So that was already trouble, because there was divide in the community. What happened after that was so they said, we have a minute. So they said, but that, what we're trying to do, we're doing an IPO because this is the best way to raise capital. And we raise capital, we have a lot of equity. We can now go and borrow a lot based on our equity, and then we can expand lending. So instead of 10 million people, 100 million people can get loans. So they were making the case, like in the movie, that we really need to go in this direction. So this was a fight going on. Then what happened, this goes into the beginning of 2010 now. So there are these two fights going on through 2009. One is basically against us, and another set of results by Dean Carlin, who's at Yale, also showing small positive results. But the microfinance community didn't like the small positive results, and they didn't like these IPOs. Then what happened is that a number of people committed suicide. A number of people in India, in one state of India, which is called Andhra Pradesh, committed suicide, some of them claiming that this because their loan burden was too high. Turned out that they had borrowed from 6 or 7 different microfinance organizations and they couldn't repay and they committed suicide. And at that point, all these forces kind of lined up in exactly the worst possible way for the industry. First, there were these suicides. Second, there was a fight within the industry. And third, there were these results showing that they hadn't done something so great. And the net result was that there was an attempt to basically there was a political attempt to shut down microcredit. And that's still continuing in a sense. And what I want to end on is showing you a video, which is, so BBC, as you saw a video that was very pro microcredit. I want to show you a video that's more recent and much less pro microcredit. Where is it? So you can see that you can have unfair views on any side you want. You can make that's a hatchet job if you have ever seen one. So main point being that I think that I only want to end on this one point, which is that if you look at this study, it does exactly almost the same job of very similar. Its rhetorical strategy is very similar. I go to some person in some village, something bad happened. That means that this thing is bad. You just look for the people, and in some ways, I think this has been the industry's problem. The reason why that guy got nailed so badly is because instead of saying that this is something that's useful and we should find out how useful it is, they started by overselling, and then they're easy target. Everybody now it's like, well, if you oversell, people have high expectations, then you don't deliver, they get very upset with you. And so that's what they're paying for now. And sort of this is like, this is exactly what you'd expect. The reason why we were trying to persuade them for at least 7-8 years that they should have a randomized evaluation. And I remember going to an MFI and explaining that they should have a randomized evaluation. They should show that they have evidence of the impact. And the guy told me, he was an interesting character. He was a Canadian who had started an MFI in rural India. And he was very, he was clearly not doing this because he was making more money that way. He was dedicated to the cause. He was living in rural India, lending people who were buying cows. So it was not, but he basically got so upset with the idea. He said, when you buy an apple, you don't look at the evaluation of that. People are buying credit, we are selling it. What's wrong with that? And so he just threw us out of his office, basically. But I think that's their problem. Their problem came from the beginning. They just kind of pushed back on any possibility that you want to make a kind of a take a reasoned view of these things, and then in some ways that creates the problem. Yeah.